Well, good afternoon to all of you. Able to hear the far end? I think the internal audit profession is too important a profession to be left in the hands of internal auditors alone. And that is possibly one reason, one qualification as to why I'm here with you this afternoon. Long years ago when I started my public speaking, many years ago, I used to have a problem with the organizers. The organizers would almost always slot me in the first session after lunch. And I was young, I was very keen to speak, and I was very passionate about what I was doing. I used to literally sit in one corner and cry. Oh, how am I going to hold this audience? I think life has turned one full circle. Venkat has made sure that I handle an afternoon session. But now I don't sit in a corner and cry, because somewhere in the course of the speaking career, somewhere I read, and therefore I would tell the organizers, please switch off the lights. When they switch off the lights, neither the audience nor the speaker is embarrassed, because both can do what they like. Okay, that was in jest. I want you to look at this company. This is a company whose factory is in India. This is a company whose employees are from India, and they all work in India. This is a company whose customers are Indian customers, no foreign customers. This is a company whose revenue, the top line, comes in INR. No dollar, no nothing. It's headquartered in India, registered with the Ministry of Company Affairs as another wonderful with-profit company. I think all of us would naturally call this an Indian company. I'm not even talking about the transnational company where you have headquarters in one country, factory in a second country, marketing taking place in a third country, R&D happening in a fourth country, operations in a fifth country. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a company which does everything in India. And you would naturally like to call that an Indian company. But look at what you see on the right side. This is a company whose most important raw material comes from Taiwan. It's a company where the key software is designed and developed in a country that comes out of Europe. The entire IT infrastructure is dependent on that. Its cloud infrastructure is done by a firm that sits in the United States of America. And these materials come, the materials that we talked about in Taiwan, the critical raw material comes via the Red Sea. Now, obviously, while this might be an Indian company in the traditional sense of the term, but it's got catches here, there, and everywhere. Something that goes wrong somewhere in the world, because there is a Donald H. Trump who says something, or there is a Taiwanese prime minister who says a different thing, or there is that European country where the software drops down for some great odd reason, your entire business is affected. And whether you like it or not, you should know it better than I, because I hardly do audits these days. You should know better than I that these are companies that are deeply interconnected. They are connected with different entities that are located in different parts of the world, as the right side of the pictures. The good news or the bad news is that these companies are all deeply efficient. They are extremely efficient, and a little while from now I'll talk about that efficiency and try to tell you how efficiency is no longer the key word in businesses, and how therefore the audit profession, including the internal audit profession, or more particularly the internal audit profession, needs to gear for something which is not about efficiency. while they have all historically been deeply efficient, in recent times, given geopolitics, given how there is protectionism in the world. When I was in school, we used to read about America's Monroe Doctrine, where America said nobody can import, we will not import from anybody, we will not export to anybody. It was called the Monroe Doctrine. And then the world over a period of time liberalized, opened up, and today it looks like everybody is closing down. I think the finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman also made that point the other day when she talked about how protectionism is increasingly happening. What I'm trying to drive home, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, is that the whole situation has become deeply fragile. It's become as fragile as that glass tumbler there. Anybody wants to pick the tumbler and drop it on the floor? Why don't you drop it? Nothing will happen. I'll talk to Venkat. I'll talk to Vijay Kumar sir also. Nothing will happen. Just drop and try. Okay. If you drop, it will break. For sure. And therefore, many of these companies are breaking. This is the scenario today. This is one reason why companies that have stood the test of time, companies that have qualified themselves from being good companies to great companies, they're all falling down. They're falling down because while they are deeply efficient, they're also increasingly fragile because they are interconnected with other countries in the world over whom they have pretty little control. So I then move on to try tell you that how the whole scenario has changed. There was once this world of efficiency. Management principles have almost always talked about efficiency. Right from the time that gentleman who spoke about division of labor, the man who practiced that in the US automobile industry, Henry Ford. From that time, people have talked about efficiency. I also worked in a company for a few years. I worked in a Chennai-based company in its management accounting function. And that time, the buzzword was total quality management. I still remember the head of finance calling for a meeting and asking us as to whom does quality apply. And almost all of us, including me, very powerfully said quality applies to the factory. And he then walked us through why quality does not apply only to the factory. It also applies to the accounting and finance function. So that was a period of TQM. Then something called BPR came, business process re-engineering. Everybody and his uncle spoke about the importance of efficiency. Everybody said we must remove redundancy. Why should we use multiple material? Let's use one material. Every organization talked about centralized procurement. I guess even today many of them do, saying that if we centralize procurement, we'll have the advantage of volume. We'll be able to get more discount. So that was the underlying idea. And the whole idea was that ultimately they'll optimize working capital, especially if you're a manufacturing company. So the name of the game was about efficiency. So if something looked extra, if something appeared more than what is available, the idea was remove it. I today work in the world of writing. So in the world of writing, people say, if something can be written in 650 words, there is no need to write 700. Which means that people say, anything that is extra is redundant, anything that is redundant should be discarded. I'm now going to differ from that. I'm now going to tell you that having more raw material, having extra, in my language, extra words, non-centralizing of procurement, and not necessarily optimizing working capital. You don't have to walk on that thin ice. You don't have to walk on that thin razor. Is actually important because what once upon a time looked like efficiency was actually building resilience. When you had that extra vendor with you, with whom you hardly did business, when you had that another raw material that you can zero in on, when you said, okay, we don't have to necessarily go via the Red Sea, we'll go via some other route also that is available. So I don't necessarily travel from where I live to another place by, let us say, the Pundamali High Road. I would like to also travel or try the outer ring road. These are all building resilience. These are all building myself for a situation where something that goes wrong, I can take an alternative. Another key thing, having a secondary data center. She comes from the IT industry. She would possibly tell you why it is so important that the data center should be in one place, how it is so very important that everything is protected, etc., etc. I'm trying to now tell you that a secondary data center holding on is also important. What I'm basically trying to drive home to all of you is not another audit framework. Because like I said, I don't come from the internal audit profession, at least at this particular point in time. So it will be presumptive of me to go try tell you this is the framework that you should adopt. This is a checklist that you adopt. I know I see a lot of young people here who might be looking for checklists and frameworks. But I actually want to pitch this a little higher to try tell you how businesses are actually changing and therefore how our profession of internal audit is also changing. If there is some part of this that goes over your head, if there is some part of this which you're not able to relate to at this particular point in time, don't worry. If you can pick just one idea across the 45 minutes that I speak, and if there is two ideas that resonate with you 1 year later, it strikes you, there was somebody who on an afternoon session put us to sleep, but in our dream we heard what he spoke, then I think you would have spent your day here. Very, very important. This is a strategic shift that is taking place, in my opinion. In my opinion, please don't audit for efficiency. Auditing for efficiency is fine. Now, please audit for resilience. Don't try find out whether this company is efficient. Please find out whether this company is resilient, which means, in case I did not explain what resilience is, it means that if a crisis happens, if a black swan event happens, if a COVID type of catastrophe happens, if a war like what Donald Trump has engineered to the world happens, and your business is disrupted, how quickly can you come back? That is the central theme of the argument that we need to take, because one disruption can destroy a company completely. I now move on. This is broadly something that I've explained, but I thought I'll quickly summarize what I said. And I summarize with that slide where I say the move is from efficiency to resilience. Resilience obviously means continuity in the end. So earlier we all talked about lean management, lean inventory. Now when you audit, ask people whether you have fallback inventory to fall back upon if the vendor is not going to supply. And I'll talk to you about this vendor story a little while later when I speak about supply chain. I'll speak actually about three things. One is supply chain. Two is cyber risk, supply chain risk, cyber risk. And I'll talk to you about that one thing that's captured the imagination of all of you today. What is that one thing that's captured the imagination of everybody? AI. The crude word for AI in the lexicon of most of us is ChatGPT. I'm not going to talk about ChatGPT, but I'm going to try to tell you how AI is now engineering the kind of risk over which we'll all have to be very, very careful about. So from being an efficient organization, you have to be an adaptive organization. From saying, hey, everything is optimized, working capital ratio should only be X, not more. We have to be ready for flexibility because we just don't know when things in the world are going to change. And I now think, once upon a time we used to joke when the Japanese came out with just in time. And I remember I also used to tell in the cost accounting class that I used to teach that while there is this principle called just in time, we in India buy or procure material just in case you want. Like, I don't know whether I can take the liberty of saying this, but when you go to the shop, you want to buy a dress. How many dresses do you buy? Anybody can answer. Who is that one? Oh, that's from my generation, so it's one only. Yeah? One. My generation. Yaar pa, who is that? As much as the offer is there, I would invite you to read one article that I wrote in a magazine recently, which talks about why offers are not actually offers. Anyway, that's a different story. Anybody else? Any of the young ladies? Only one extra. Minimum one extra. So how many more extras? And why do you buy? Just in case. Just in case you need. That's actually a good idea. Rather than say, no, I'll buy 2 days before my wedding anniversary, and then the rain pours. Or she may not know, the husbands would know, if they decide to buy just 2 days before the anniversary, and the rain pours. They could be in trouble. So from just in time, just in case, which looked funny earlier, is now the order of the day. So continuation or being constantly on the move has entered strategy. I think boardrooms increasingly should discuss. I'm sure they must be discussing. They're all wise men and women who sit on India boards. Instead of discussing about efficiency, I think they should also discuss part of their time on resilience. And all of you people who are into audit committees, who make presentations in audit boards, people like DPR should actually be telling companies that all this is efficient, but if this happens, if this catastrophe happens, what is it that you must do? Okay? Let me move on. This is what could happen. And this is actually, what should I say? This is not an imaginary situation. This has happened. Okay? Let us say there was a halt in the Red Sea. As disruptions have taken place because some one odd event happened. The freight therefore naturally spikes up. The freight therefore naturally goes up. The material that you are supposed to receive gets received late, which means that there is a pressure on inventory, which means that there is a cash flow disruption, which means that your working capital is impacted, and the whole cycle gets affected. Insurance needs to be taken. Yes, insurance needs to be taken. So what I'm trying to drive at is that we need to have alternatives. That may be the best route to take. But you must have alternatives in terms of, if something goes wrong there, what should I do elsewhere? And when you audit, while the companies will swear by one route, one efficiency, and they look upon people like you and I from the accounting profession as bean counters, it is important for us to go tell them, hey, look, this alternative needs to be kept. Why should this alternative be kept? I'll tell you that as well. Today the risks are absolutely interconnected. It's like the COVID that caught fire. One guy in the family got, next one got, next one got, next one got. So, geopolitics, which is basically, I would call, I don't know what the textbook guys call it, I would call politics in different geographies. There are reasons why people in countries act the way that they act. I'll give you an example. It was, of course, today the communists don't rule any state. When they used to rule the state of West Bengal, for example, they would make observations which are one, but their actual action was completely different. And there was this very powerful statement that somebody made that when it comes to the communists, don't look at what they say, look at what they do. And that's true in politics. That's true across geographies. So geopolitics drives. And for example, energy prices go up. Why should I say for example? Energy prices have gone up. They go up. When energy prices go up, you and I face retail inflation in a big way. Companies also face inflation. And when inflation happens, to contain that, interest rates are jacked up. The Reserve Bank of India steps in. They jack up the interest rate. This creates demand pressure. There is a liquidity stress. And when there is a crisis, people might try to cut the odd corner. So all these risks, in my opinion, today are interconnected. Once upon a time, you and I could audit each risk independently. Today, while you might still continue to audit each risk independently, it's also important to see what is the connection amongst them. Okay? This is another example, so I'll skip that. This is another example. Red Sea was an example. The semiconductor shock was another example. Okay? Now let us look at the supply chain risk. I said I'll talk to you about 3 risks, the supply chain risk. When it comes to supply chain, skip that, just keep that and leave that. Okay? What is important for all of us to understand, appreciate and realize is that every organization says that for a purchase I've got multiple vendors. Okay? I'm sure you also try to check out whether there are multiple vendors. If you have done what I'm now going to say, then it is good. If you have not done what I'm now going to say, please do it. Okay? There are 3 vendors or 4 vendors there. It is very important to find out this vendor will procure from whom. The second vendor, the third vendor, the fourth vendor, is he going to supply by himself or is he going to procure from whom? During COVID time, almost many companies did not know who was the actual original vendor. So if for all that you know, vendor 2, 3, 4 is going to procure from vendor 1. If 2, 3, 4 are producers by themselves, it's fine. But if they are going to source their material from 1, then you are sitting on a crisis. That's point number 1. Point number 2, which I think is far more important, is you have multiple vendors. Good. But when did you last interact with that second vendor or third vendor? When did you buy material from him? How do you therefore know that if the first vendor plays the game and you choose to go to the second vendor, how do you know the second vendor is going to deliver and deliver well? So it's also, in my opinion, important that organizations, if they do it, it's good. It's important that organizations must, like you do surprise check in cash, organizations must surprise decide that I'm going to buy for some reason from the second vendor, although the second vendor cost-wise may not be as good as the first. Okay? So it's very important to understand whether there are concentration risks. When I say concentration risk, what I mean is how much of sourcing is done from one vendor, whether subsequent vendors that you have on your pipeline are dependent on the first vendor. When I say have continuity assumptions being stress tested, what I mean is what I explained a little while ago. Have you tried the second vendor? Have you tried the third vendor for you to know that when a crisis comes, this will work? Okay? And you must also realize that in our hunt or in our chase for efficiency here would mean doing things only for the first vendor. Are we weakening resilience? Are we weakening a crisis? In the world in which I currently live or reside, like in the world of writing, if you were running, let us say, a magazine, or if you're running a newspaper, I know that doesn't connect 100% with you, but I think the example is simple. If you have one writer writing for you, and you don't have a backup set of people who would write in his place, then you are running a risk in case that principal writer decides not to write for a particular week. What I also try to hint at is that when he decides not to write, you cannot go to the second guy. You should, even while he is there, stress test by seeing whether the second writer can write. This is true in HR. This is true everywhere. It is also therefore true in the world of supply chain. Okay? I'm very conscious that I'm going to talk about cyber security at a time when she is sitting there. But that's fine. The job of a chairman, I've always believed is to protect the speaker. So I'll take the risk and speak about it. Cyber risk is no longer merely an IT issue. Cyber risk today, in my opinion, and I could be hopelessly wrong, is a reputational issue. Okay? Is a reputational issue. One ransomware, one place can disrupt. And not only that, it is not just important that you have checks and balance in your organization. You also have to check for the vulnerabilities that are there in external organizations with which you interact, because increasingly the weakest point may not necessarily be in your organization itself. Okay? When it comes to audit, I think the earlier question, at least in my earlier days of practice, people used to say, are controls in existence? It was also in audit. It was increasingly in cyber. Today I think that more than saying, do controls exist? And I'm sure many of the people here will be practicing it. What is far more important is, can we detect? Can we respond? And can we detect before the event happens? Can we respond as quickly as the event happens? And can we recover fast enough? Which would also mean, are we open to escalating this information to people who matter? Because whether you like it or not, and I can tell with personal experience and conviction that people who run organizations, and I've run organizations, people who run organizations intuitively or as a first defense mechanism don't want to hear the bad news. They want to hear the good news. But you would do your job well only if and only if you escalate the bad news first. It is always good to know the bad news firsthand from your auditor. Always good to know bad news firsthand from your organization, then to get the bad news from elsewhere. I'll give you an example. Don't misunderstand my example. If somebody in your house, your son, your daughter, your nephew or your niece decides to get married and gets married, okay, and you get to know from a third party, how would you feel? As opposed to they deciding to get married, not letting you know and still getting married, but then come to you first and say, I got married. Now that's, in my opinion, I know this example is not the best one, that in my opinion is much, much better. So in other words, where there is a crisis, people in the profession of internal audit will have to sound it out to the man or the men who count. Because between the men who count and you, there is a thick layer of people. And some of these thick layers of people might actually stop information from going forward. I move to the third and last one. I do not know whether you have watched this. Who is the hottest cricketer today? Suryavanshi. Have you heard some of the interviews that he has given? Have you heard the interview where he talks about Virat Kohli? What did he speak? What did he speak about Kohli? That is the good part of it. The other interviews. There is an interview where somebody asked Suryavanshi, who is your role model? He named somebody, and then they asked him, what about Virat Kohli? And he says, if a man took 18 attempts or 17 attempts to win the IPL trophy, then he can't be my model. Or there was a related question, I think. Instead of Rajasthan Royals, where would you like to work? Where will you like to play? I'll play any team, but I won't play in Virat's team because that's a team that took so many matches. Some crap. That interview is obviously fake. That interview has made the rounds left, right and center. That interview is obviously fake. And that's fake. You know that. At least with professional skepticism because you have seen how this boy generally behaves and talks. What I'm now trying to tell you is that today frauds are that much more easy. Deepfake scams are enormous. AI-based phishing is huge, and there is automated misinformation that is going around. And therefore, in the works that we do, we have to be extremely and totally careful. The challenges now are not the kind of challenges that were there when I came out of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. The challenges now that are there are not even the kind of challenges that were there in the early 2000s. The challenges that are there now are more deep-rooted, more technology-driven, and they are more deep-rooted and more technology-driven. Okay? Like I was trying to hint at, I think you would pick up these clues as you see, let us say, recurring exceptions taking place in the organization, or organization giving recurring exceptions. There are repeated delays. There are workarounds that are becoming normal, and escalations to top bosses are slowing down. These are red flags, and you know enough of red flags from your internal audit. So your red flags now have to be modified to suit the evolving, changing world of AI. Okay? I would like to think that resilience is not just about avoiding all crises. I would like to think that resilience is about absorbing also about taking the shock and then adapting to it quickly. And most importantly, recovering and this is the most important one, continue functioning under stress. I'll give you an example from the world of medicine. There are so many ailments that hit people. The fit guy is not the one who does not get any of those ailments. The fit guy or the smart guy is possibly one who gets this ailment or that ailment, but he does not allow that ailment to sabotage him. He quickly gets around it and works around it, which is what I'm trying to indicate here. A good organization is not an organization that does not face a fraud. A good organization is not an organization that does not face any crisis. It faces fraud, it faces crisis, but most importantly, it is able to come back, recover, and hit back on the zone. Okay? I'll just move on. This is what I already spoke to you about, so I'm going to skip. From a very, operational perspective, we have in internal audit, the move is from compliance to organizational intelligence. All along, and I don't know even recently, internal auditors talked about compliance. Is this right? Is that right? Is this process there? Is that process there? And are these processes working? The first important thing that I want all of us to understand is that era is over. 2020 showed us that we can never take the world as being certain. We have to build an evaluation for resilience. I might be repeating, but I think repetition pushes home the point better. Okay? We have to have early warning insights in terms of how things are going wrong. And most importantly, we must have an evaluation which tells us that if things go wrong, how do I come back? I'm going to close out, and as I try to close out, I will put across 5 questions. These are the 5 questions that need answers. And I'm not going to provide those answers. I'm going to put them up to you. Where, in which areas are we dangerously dependent? Could be raw material. Could be manpower, like how the airline industry is. Okay? Could be raw material. Could be manpower. Could be energy. Different companies, different. So it's important to know where are we dangerously dependent and how do we build resilience for it. It's also important to know what are the risks that are interconnected. I showed you a picture where I talked about interconnection, energy prices, inflation, interest rates, etc. So you'll have to look at interconnection. Third one is very important. I did spend a bit of time on that. How quickly does bad news travel upwards? It's very, very, very important that bad news should travel upwards very, very quickly. My view is, if I were today the CEO of an organization and I engaged an internal audit guy, I would like him to talk testing whether compliance is working, but I would more importantly try to test what will happen if some of the foundational parameters by which the organization stands, if they get chopped, how do I come back? How do I get back on my feet? And I don't want to know what is the probability of that happening. I am very clear that that would happen if a COVID can happen. If something that can put how many million population in the world? Billion or? No. Population of the world. 826 crore. Or let's for this purpose say 800 crores. If one tiny, unseeable, God knows what was COVID, I don't know. I'll call it an insect now because I've forgotten the word. Virus. One unseen, invisible virus can send 800 crore people packing, sitting in their home for one full year. If that can happen, I think anything else can happen as well. I'm going to put out my final point. Volatility. Everybody ask any management expert, he'll talk about VUCA. The V in VUCA, volatility, is no longer an occasional disruption. Even if you have all along grown thinking it is an occasional disruption, please think that this is going to happen oftener. It is now in the environment itself. That virus is sitting in the environment itself. And let me really close by trying to tell you, to summarize the essence of what I had in mind. When I started preparing the script, this is what I had in mind. So I thought I should put this out to you. In stable times, efficiency creates value. You have to be efficient in order to generate value. In unstable times, in volatile times, and increasingly the world is volatile, it is resilience that will help you preserve that value. Otherwise, all the value that you have built is disrupted. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention.